Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the SSB Ground School series. On this series, we're going to hear from Bob Faris. He's going to talk to us about OLC scores and also the speed weekend scoring and how to do that. Bob's pretty passionate about getting us back at the top of the list in North America for both categories. But before we get started on that, there's a couple announcements I'd like to make. First of all, we've got the annual meeting, or not annual meeting, but we've got a club meeting coming up on March 20, Friday, March 26th at 8 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, sorry, 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. So we hope to see everybody. And of course, prospective members are more than welcome to attend the SSB meeting. A couple other things we've got coming up in 2 weeks, the Landout database. So on March 23rd, we have the Landout database, and we'd really like to get all the Colorado cross-country pilots to attend that. We'll be sending out a list of the spots, the Landout spots that are going to be discussed, and we'll start with the obvious ones that are paved, but there's still something to talk about with a couple of those. And then we'll also talk about some of the maybe less desirable ones, the second choice Landouts. So a email will go out. I'm going to ask our friends at Colorado Soaring and at Black Forest to send that around and see if we can maximize the number of pilots involved on that. But we'll have it somewhat organized on what we're going to talk about. So please update your databases, and if you drove some of those recently, we'd like to hear about it. The other thing is the capstone session. Now, we've been doing this ground school obviously to teach everybody, but more importantly, to build some club culture and highlight we've just got a wonderful group of cross-country pilots here that do some great flights. And so we've had a series of them talking. The last one, the capstone one, I really want it to be all about our up and coming pilots, what I call our aspiring pilots. And so the format that I'm thinking about doing for that one, we're going to have a panel of, they haven't been selected yet, but about 3 to 5 of our accomplished pilots will be on a panel. And we'll have about a dozen or 2 dozen aspiring pilots, newer pilots, some students who haven't gotten their ratings yet. We'll be asking questions, and we'll spend a little time formatting the questions beforehand, but we're not going to tell the accomplished the panel pilots what those questions are. So we're going to want good answers where they kind of have to think about it and not just give prepared answers to these questions. So I think it'll be fun, and we're trying to do this so that it really helps these aspiring pilots. So anyway, please be prepared for that last one. I think it comes up in May 11th will be the capstone forum. And we're really going to want to hear from our aspiring pilots. So with that, we're going to move along to Bob Faris's presentation on OLC. Bob probably doesn't need a lot of introduction. He's our chief instructor at the club, been at the club a lot longer than I'm aware for a long time. He's got 1,500 hours in hang glider that he started in the 79 or so, 6,000 hours in airplanes with CFIs in single engine, multi-engine instrument, and of course glider. He's got about 6,500 hours in gliders, holds a gold badge with 3 diamonds. He's won 3 regional contests and holds a whopping 89 state records. He's chairman of SSA Badges and Records Committee. Very experienced pilot, great instructor, and great gentleman as well. We really are happy to have Bob with us. So Bob, with that, would you please go ahead and take over and tell us about OLC and Speed Weekends?
Mute. Yeah, thanks. You can hear okay now?
Yeah, we hear you now. Please go ahead.
Okay. All right. Let me, I'm going to go ahead and go to the slideshow. Let's see if we can get that up. And up. I think you need to enable my screen sharing there. You're still up on the main one. I'm seeing you, but I'm kind of in the thumbnail there. Ah, there we go. Okay. Now let's see. I think that is okay. There we go. You can see that now?
Yes, go ahead, Bob.
Okay, I will start that then. All right, so kind of put together a OLC presentation of hopefully for people that'll be able to use it that have never used OLC, as well as those that are experienced users. So going to be kind of hitting a little bit of each. So what is the OLC is what we're going to start with. How do you post flights on the OLC? What kinds of data are available on the OLC? Of course, you want to know the rules so you can get scored well, and then talk about some optimization of scoring and maybe some tips that people may not have thought about. So with that, the background of OLC, it's what it is a decentralized scoring system that you can post your flights on and compare them to other flights, either regionally, nationally, or worldwide, to see how you're doing, and also to look at your own flights as well. It was developed started in 1999, and just a few people in the US were participating back then. And now it's kind of leveled off at around 1,100 a year for the US. And we're seeing worldwide participation about 14,000 a year. Again, pretty much leveled off. And there isn't any cost to using it. And you just have to have an OLC or an IGC file downloaded. You don't have to worry about how to figure the flight or anything when you're first starting out. You can just put it on there and everything works. There are multiple contests to run at the same time within OLC. So we'll look at some of those a little later to kind of give you an idea of the scope of things. And again, it's a great tool for not only comparison of the flights and the contest with other pilots, but you can look at your own progress. I tend to look back year to year, and I can look back 15 years or so and see how many hours I've been flying this year compared to last, my miles. Am I getting better? Am I getting worse? What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? So it's a really good tool. I try to post most all my flights onto it, even if the shorter ones. And it's really helped bring more interest in soaring flights. There's a lot of people that'll get their rating and soar for a year or two and do the local soaring flights and get kind of bored with it. The OLC gives you a challenge to do better and kind of measure yourself not only against other pilots, but against your own flights, and gives you a good tool to improve. And it goes hand in hand with badges and records, as well as the newer thing that Clemens was talking about, the forgot the name of it now, but we can use that as well on the OLC as well as the Proving Grounds flights. There's a presentation that Doug Haluza gave back in 2006, and it gives a little better, just more detailing of OLC than this presentation is going to be. But there are a number of the rules that have changed and the user interface has changed. But here's the URL for that. How do you get started? Okay, so I would recommend using the OLC link from the SSA site, and that's the link to SSA. The problem is if you just log in on OLC, it'll usually go to the like Google it up. It'll go to the worldwide presentation, and you won't be able to see the league scoring in the U.S. and some of the things will drop out. So if you go through the SSA supported link, it'll be US centered and work probably better for you. You need to register one time and it's free. They do take, I think it's a 12 euro donation if you want it, but you can log your flight without it. They'll give you a few other features if you give them their 12 euros a year. And it only takes a couple minutes to register, and it's quick and easy. And then you just fly a flight and then download it. And you need an OLC logger. This URL has the link of all the OLC approved loggers. Some of them are cell phone based, so you can download like iGlide and some of the Android run software and get an OLC logger trace that will work for the basic OLC. And that will give you what I'll talk about in a few minutes, a blue validation that you can use for the OLC Plus. It will not allow you to do any of the speed contests though. For that, you need to get a one that'll give you an IGC approved logger to get access to that. All of our club gliders have FLARM, and all the FLARMs give a file with a green validation. That can be used for any of the OLC contests. The scoring is automatic, so you don't have to worry about starting and finishing and where you put it in the claims like you would on a badge or record flight. You just drop it in there and it takes care of it, and it gives you the value. You can modify that and edit it if you don't agree with the start and finish of what they are showing. So you can modify that, but just dropping it in doesn't take any effort at all. And you'll usually see the results within a minute or so, sometimes a little longer in the summer when there's a lot of flights being logged. Caveat, you have to claim your flight within 48 hours of landing. If not, it'll just go a zero flight, so you won't be able to claim it. And don't claim a flight that has airspace violation. Like if you bust a class Bravo or go up into class Alpha, don't post it. It's because it's there forever, and you don't want to have that. There are cases though, you might have a special clearance into class Alpha or clearance through restricted airspace, and then just note that in the comment section of your flight, and that'll take care of that problem. What information can you see on OLC? You can look at all the different contests that are being simultaneously run nationally and internationally. Again, you can look at your own flight statistics and look at your club statistics and look at other club statistics and compare. Again, I look back at the database. It'll go back 15 years pretty easily if you've been logging it that long. And look at your flights and look at other people's flights. It's a great tool if you're going to be traveling, if you're going to go to a contest somewhere, fly in, or just taking a flying vacation. You can pull up airfield statistics from other areas and see when the season to fly there might be the best, or what people are doing, how long the flights are getting out of that area, and look at the routes that work well. And various strategies you can gain from looking at the flight traces. The first thing that you'll log into, or when you open up the OLC, will be the OLC Plus daily score. And this is kind of replaced, if you used it before, the OLC Classic was part of it. And then we had a separate OLC FAI scoring, which took in some triangles distances. Those have been kind of merged together to give you one score now. And that's always the page that's going to display initially. What this is the course distance flown over a maximum of 6 legs. You don't have to do 6 legs. You can do 1 leg, but up to 6. Bob Caldwell talked about the other day about going over legs. We'll talk about some of the problems with that. So remember that maximum 6 legs. You also get a 30% scoring bonus for an FAI triangle distance, the biggest FAI triangle that will fit within the course that you flew. What that is, if you're used to reading the sporting code, it's a little different rule for the FAI triangle in OLC. The maximum the minimum leg distance, if you go over 500 kilometers, is going to be 25%, and below that it's going to be 28%. So that's a little different than the sporting code, which is 750K, but basically a little less than an equilateral triangle. If you're looking at your moving map display, will kind of give you that idea. And a lot of the computers, of course, will put that automatically, tell you your triangle distance as well. The maximum allowable altitude loss from the start of the distance flown to the end is 1,000 meters, 3,281 feet. So that doesn't mean that it'll invalidate the flight. It just means if you drop more than that from whatever the optimized start and the optimized finish might be, it just will stop counting your distance at that point. So climbing up to 18,000 and then gliding down and thinking you're going to get a really long flight from that point, and then you spend the last half of the flight at 10,000 feet. Well, that won't count, because it's got to be the 3,281 feet drop. And this is also based on handicap scoring using the OLC index, which is the DAC index. And this is a English version, so it's kind of been translated a little easier to read than the German. My German has kind of gone by the wayside over the years, so this one's an easier wiki translation of it. Just as a point of reference, how that works. And again, you don't have to worry about putting your handicap in. It's all automatic. You just put the ladder you flew, the handicap's already indexed within the OLC program. So for our 505, the handicapping on that is 104. So you take 100 divided by 104, gives you 0.96. So that's a multiplier of distance. So you'll get 96% of your kilometer distance will translate to the points. For the discus, it's 93%. And for the K21, you get 109% because of the lower performance. The total for your OLC plus score is the maximum 6 leg distance in kilometers plus the 30% FAI triangle distance times the handicap factor. And speed doesn't enter into the scoring on the OLC plus, but remember, you're always racing the sun. So you've got X number of hours before the sun sets. And that's going to determine your maximum distance flown, unless you have lights and you can fly at night. But I don't know anybody that does that. So this is the scoring that's used for all the OLC contests other than the speed contests. And again, you only need an OLC approved logger that provides the blue validation, and you don't have to have the IGC certified. So you can use your cell phone loggers or whatever. I would recommend, though, if you have a IGC logger, use that one, because you're going to find when you start going into speed contests, they will be invalidated for that. And every year I'm having to call around and get the guys that log their flights, got a blue validation, then they have to go back, re-download their IGC approved logger in order to get the league scoring or any of the speed scoring. And it's kind of always a hassle. So if you just start with the IGC logger, if you have one, that works best. The OLC year is it's sort of odd. It's the 11th day before the first Saturday in October. It's German rules. So until the following year. So that it's pretty much, I guess, an off season for both the northern and southern hemispheres is probably why they chose that, and breaks it up. We're still in prime flying usually in October, so it doesn't really it doesn't really end our season before the OLC season starts the new year. So there's kind of some overlap in those. For the rules, here's the URL for that. Now the speed OLC, there's a variety of speed contests, and it's the same contest period as the OLC Plus, the October to October, except for the 19 round league contest, which we're going to break out a little later. This does again require the IGC logger requiring a green validation. And on this one, you have to record your takeoff. If you don't, your flight won't count for any of the speed scoring. So turn on the logger several minutes before you're getting ready to go. Sometimes the lock doesn't occur right away. Just make sure you got a GPS lock before you start rolling, or your speed OLC won't count. Difference on this one, there's a maximum of 4 legs rather than 6 legs. Again, you don't have to use all 4, but there's 4 available. And it's the best 2.5 hour speed over the flight. So if you're flying an 8 hour flight, it's going to look for that 2.5 hour interval that gives you the highest scored speed. If you just shoot for a 2.5 hour flight and go fly it and come back, maybe come back a little early, the distance is going to be divided by 2.5 hours. So you're just cutting down your speed if you fly short. Again, it's all automatic for picking that best interval of scoring though. Slightly different handicap factor than the OLC Plus. It doesn't favor the slower gliders and doesn't penalize the faster gliders quite as much. It's more, and it's about 75%. There's some weird scoring in there, but it's just a little less handicap relation for the OLC Plus or for the speed OLC. And a really important factor on this is the finish point of the interval can't be lower than the start. So again, if you climb up, say, to 18,000 feet and think you're going to have a really nice high start, and then you start your speed scoring and, you know, fly for 2.5 hours and come back at 10,000 feet, it won't count that first part because you're going to be lower than your 18,000. So it's going to wait until your interval drops to 10,000, which would be your finish point. So it's kind of an important thing to consider on how high you're going to start. I mean, probably an optimum start might be, you know, if you can start out low and you're climbing on an energy line, you're going to work along the distance and still get speed scoring while you're climbing. That's an optimum way. And then you can use your initial start as a lower point, and that makes it a little easier sometimes. Another thing that gets people a lot, there has to be a fix recorded after the start of soaring within 15 kilometers of the center of the airfield, takeoff airfield. So there's a lot of our scoring in Boulder where people tow back to Gold Lake, back to the peak highway, and then never re-enter this 15-kilometer circle, and that invalidates the whole flight. So I usually put a start rank of that distance, just like I would in a contest, as a start rank. Or you can look at your mileage. If you don't want to use kilometers, it's 9.2 statute miles, which puts you about just a little short of Gold Hill and a little short of Gross Reservoir if you're flying out of Boulder. Again, there's another caveat to this one, that this entered in a couple of years ago. You have to have a fix after the end of the scoring within 15 kilometers of the takeoff point. So if you fly this great flight and then land out in Fort Collins Loveland, the flight won't count for the OLC speed. So you got to come back through that 15-kilometer circle again. And the speed rules are at this point. League scoring, that's the one that I've been really kind of pushing the last few years. It's a real good way to get into, if you're not a contest pilot, it's probably the closest OLC has to true contest flying. So even though we're not declaring where we're going like you would in a contest or having to fly a task, it's much more of a thinking process to get started on this. There's 19 weekend rounds starting the third weekend of April every year, and it runs every weekend. So the other scoring is 7 days a week, 365 days a year, but this is only a weekend scoring league. And again, starting the third weekend of April, runs into somewhere around the mid to end of August. And the scoring rules are the same as the speed OLC that I just presented on that previous slide. And how this works, this is a team event rather than an individual event. I mean, an individual, of course, can enter it, but they're going to be not scoring well if they only have the one score. So it's the 3 best scores from different club members for each round. So you can't fly Saturday and Sunday and get 2 different scores for the same person. So you got to have different people flying and hopefully doing well. But even if they're just doing mediocre, 3 people flying is a lot better than 1 person doing pretty well. It's kind of an odd scoring system. It's a Formula One scoring. So the highest scoring team weekend is going to get the maximum points. There's several different point values down in here. They'll get the maximum point, and then each progressive lower scoring team is going to get 1 less point, and then the least you can get is 1 point. So everybody gets a participation trophy of 1 point. For the World League scoring, it's all the teams in the OLC worldwide, and that gives a maximum point round score of 40, and then it descends on down to 1 point if you pass the 39th team. The Gold League consists of the 18 highest scoring teams from the previous seasons in the OLC league scoring, and that gives a maximum point round score of 12. And the Silver League is everybody else in the US, and that has a maximum point round of 20. And at the end of the season, then things get shuffled. The 4 best scoring teams in Silver League, 4 scoring teams in the Gold League will drop back down to the Silver League. So we'll look at that in minutes. Who's moved up? I think Colorado Soaring Association's in there now. So good job. OLC scoring tips. These are just kind of some things I've thought about, and some of them are obvious, some of them maybe not. Like Bob and Clemens have talked about it previously, follow the energy lines as much as possible. It really rewards your scoring for that. You'll learn to recognize clouds and your different energy lines, and if you can try to stay on those, it'll really reward you. I think Clemens talked about a great flight he had, and that was along the energy line, and it was a really fast flight. So that works well. Try to minimize your course changes. If you just kind of fly aimlessly about, you're going to be really hurting your scoring. You want to fly straight lines. Of course, you don't want to get out of your energy lines, but try to keep it on a straight course, especially early in the flight. If you start turning, every 10 miles and then make a turn and then make a turn back somewhere, you're wasting legs. But thing on this, don't fly past the end of the energy line. So let's say you're going to be running up north and you see it fading out up north of the Big Thompson, but you want to kind of maximize that distance. You might fly up the end of that and then get stuck. So you want to be careful that you try to stay on the energy lines. And again, too many course changes will really drop your scoring down. I've looked at my flights after I get back sometimes, and I'll have some dog legs in there that just get angled across, and all that distance was wasted in the scoring because I've run out of legs. If I go past the 6 legs, it just won't help you. So there's kind of an incongruity with the OLC plus scoring and the OLC speed scoring. If you want to score a really long OLC plus flight, that probably is going to require a very early start. And then oftentimes, at least in Boulder, a long high toe, it's going to put you way back in, and you may not be able to nick through that 15-kilometer start point. And that's happened to a number of our members that want to get out early and fly, but then again, they're not able to score for the team scoring in the OLC league. So you got to kind of decide what you want to do on those things. Not every flight is going to be a 1,000K flight, and I don't know, you can kind of make the decision for yourself, of course. Long flights out of Boulder, we often go through a lot of microclimates as we're flying. If we go along the convergence up to the north, oftentimes when I get into Wyoming, the winds really dramatically will pick up. you need to be very aware of winds. Talk about that in a minute too. But kind of consider what kind of climate you're going to be flying into when you're planning these flights. Going across the divide, there's usually a totally different air mass many days over there, and that's going to change the way you're going to be flying. You'll see a lot of times lower moist air on the east side of the divide, high cloud base on the west side. And when you get down to the South Park, I've seen lots of change-ups there. There's, of course, a lot of other climates we're flying through. The main ridge, of course, the Continental Divide, north-south, but there's a lot of east-west ridges that we exploit out of Boulder that'll put us like over to Steamboat along the high ground between Walden and Granby. A lot of different places like that, back towards the Loveland Pass area. And then as you get into South Park, it kind of splits and you can stay on the east side on a high ground or the west side. So all those are going to be changing as you're making these flights. This is a lot different than flying the Sierras. We'll look at some of those Sierra flights in a few minutes. That's kind of a long, unbroken ridge, mountain range in the Owens Valley. And it's a lot easier just to fly straight, long flights, and you don't have the change-ups quite that we do here. But it makes it interesting to fly here. So a lot of times I'll fly along an energy line going south, and I'll just kind of get bored and kind of want to make a diversion to the west. And it kind of hurts my score, but I find that to be an interesting flight too. So just do that on occasion. Keep track of the winds. They can change up on you vertically when you're moving vertically and horizontally. Track them, because wind is critical for soaring. I mean, it's going to determine where the lift is going to be pushing up if you're low on a ridge, where the convergence lines are, how difficult it's going to be to get up if you fall out of the lift band working through sheared lines. So anyway, it's critical to note the winds all the time. Be sure you note your altitude and position of your release or engine shutdown to be able to close the triangle at the end of your flight. That needs to be closed within 1 kilometer horizontally, and again, a maximum of 1,000 meters vertically. Now, a lot of people think they have to fly right to where they release to close that triangle. That's not true. You can close it anywhere along an intersecting line of your previous course line. Like, let's say you had a long flight and you had a triangle down to the south and you came back. You don't necessarily have to close it right there. You can just cross your track. The caveat, though, is the 1,000 meters vertically. I've gotten stung on that one, where I came back under my flight line, previous flight line, and I was more than 3,000 feet below where I crossed initially, and it didn't allow me the triangle distance. So I want to talk about some density altitude effects. A lot of people don't maybe think about all these things. Higher density altitude, you can really pick up your cross-country speed, and of course with distance as well, because it's you have higher speed over the same time, you're going to be flying farther. If we look at a typical summer day in Colorado, we'll probably see a density altitude of well over 20,000 feet as we get up close to Class Alpha airspace. And you can think about this as a 2% increase of true airspeed. It's a pretty rough estimate per 1,000 feet. So if you're flying up at 18,000 with your density altitude of 20,000, that's a 40% increase in cruise speed. And if you look at like adding a full water ballast load, a lot of people think or say that it bumps your cruise speed up about 10 knots as compared to unballasted, maybe more if you can get a real heavy load. But your density altitude effect is going to add about 30 knots. So it's by far and away more important to fly high than it is to add water, if you look at it on that basis. Think of climbing in altitude. It's just like adding water ballast. The higher you climb, the more ballast you're adding. When you're dropping, it's just like dumping that ballast. So a good strategy might be to stay high, and you get a better achieved speed a lot of times by flying slower and staying high than flying your classic McCready theory, and where you're diving down out of the higher altitudes and then having to work up through the lower altitude bands at a slower speed. So I think you'll find that's going to work pretty well if you use the high altitude when you have that available on the 18,000 foot cloud base days. We've got some polar errors at altitude that a lot of people might not be thinking about. A polar curve is based on equivalent units of vertical and horizontal speed. That is your climb and sink rate on the vertical axis of your polar, and the horizontal speed is the x-axis. So variometers approximate a true rate of climb. By that, I mean, as we look at indicated airspeed, it's a lot different. It's reading out what you're actually getting, both mechanical and electronic variables. Airspeed indicators, of course, are always reading indicated airspeed. So we're mixing two units of non-equal units there. I guarantee your McCready speed is going to be wrong if you're using a McCready ring, the classic ring that goes on your airspeed indicator, because that's not going to be compensating at all for your indicated versus true airspeed. It's going to be off by a lot. Your flight computers may or may not compensate correctly for density altitude effects. I've talked to manufacturers at the conventions, and I haven't been able to get a good straight answer for them. I don't feel that probably the most of these flight computers are compensating for the change of true airspeed versus indicated airspeed, and then your absolute rate of climb with your varios. So I think you want to really be careful about flying what your flight computer spits out when you dial in a McCready of 5. I would dial back, if you find this to be true, think about dialing back your McCready setting to the true climb rate adjusted for altitude. So what I mean by this is, if let's say you're seeing a setting that's going to give you a 5 McCready setting, and you're flying at 18,000 feet, take 60% of that, dial it to 3, and you're probably going to be a little closer on your speed to fly. Now, the problem that's still in there, if your flight computer doesn't compensate accurately for it, is that as you fly into increasing sink of air, it's going to over predict what you need for your speed to fly. It's going to be on the high side. The problem also, a lot of people fly fixed band speeds. Instead of using a McCready setting, they'll just go to an 80 knot cruise interthermal. If you're cruising at 18,000 feet, that 80 knots is going to be 110 knots true. And you're probably going to be a little on the fast side. You might want to think about dialing that back as well. So just some things to think about. Changes to the OLC. Each year there's a few of them. What's happened now, it's now possible to download your flight directly to OLC using some of your LNAV products and directly from CU. They dropped that off because of some security concerns a few years ago. It's back in, I guess, this year. You can now get a detailed flight analysis for your flight on a tab directly out of OLC without having to download your flight to CU. So it'll pull up CU automatically for you. And you can now add stories to your flights to include photos. So if you got some photos you want to include, you can put those along with your flight claim. There's some other platforms that are coming out, and it's probably causing the OLC to be a little more competitive this year. Clemens showed me Weagle the other day. It's a new contest scoring that's being used in Europe now. And instead of OLC, they're tending to use it now for contests. And it has a little different emphasis on the scoring parameters. It gives you more credit, triangles, declared tasks. It's got some interesting, it's got a little better ways of downloading data if you want to look at big downloads. And you can upload your flight to it for any number of years. There's not a 48-hour limit. You can, if you want, you back to Weagle and put it on years ago. So anyway, it's a new system that might work out for people. Let's see. What I'm gonna do is pull up the OLC score. So, like I said, can everybody see this SSA screen now?
Yes.
Are you seeing that?
Yes, Bob, we can see the SSA.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I made that transition. So if you get a sailplane racing at the SSA.org site and come down to online contest score, this is the tab I would use that'll put you into this page. And then you can go to the daily score right there. So again, this will drop right into the day score for the OLC Plus. And it looks like Seminole's going strong. And Clemens, he got a good flight out of Boulder today. We may look at that. I'll see if I can, let me see if I can minimize that just a little. Sorry about this. I'm going to try to get rid of some of this stuff here. Well, I can't quite get over to the, let me see if I can move you guys out of the way here. Okay. Clemens score, 381 points, 383 kilometers. So we got a nice score. Before I get to that though, what I would like to do is go through what these different tabs do here. So this goes into the USA scoring. And if you want to look at the other scores, you can see worldwide, various continents. And in North America, you can break this out to all of USA, or you can look at the different regions. We're in region 9. So depending on how you want to filter, you can use that. If you want to look back for different years, you can go all the way back to 2007. Prior to that, there was a UI change, so a little harder to see, but all these are going to be the same interface as this current one. If we look at the OLC scoring, here are the different contests that are run simultaneously. So this is the daily score. OLC Plus champion, that's going to be the best 6 flights for the season of the highest daily scores off the OLC Plus. So if we look at that, Jim Lee out in Minden's got the highest score here. His shortest flight's 529 points, and his longest one's 1,200 points. And it's just barely starting the season. So if you look down, we've got, Bob Caldwell's in 7th, and I've got one in 10th. So we've got some pretty good showing. Most of these flights are all out west. So except for Rich Owen out in Seminole, you'll see that the West kind of dominates the OLC scoring, especially as we get into the main part of the season. Best flight will give you the longest flight for the whole season so far. And if you want to look at what can really be done, this distance record will give you the historical flights since 2011, the longest ones, the fastest ones. Jim Payne did an amazing flight out of Minden a few years ago, working on the Perlin project, 2,900 kilometers, almost 1,800 miles. So long flight. And if we want to look and see what that flight looks like, go over to the info, click on that, and it'll pull up the flight statistics for you. So what you can see is along the Sierras. Now, if I log in, I can go to the advanced scoring. So I'm going to log in here and move it on to the advanced, and we can kind of see that flight a little better. So what this is, kind of want to point out of how the long flights are made. So Minden area taking off right in here. I think he took off from Minden, yeah. But he's running 6 legs in the Sierra Wave. This is Sierra Nevadas, and just back and forth along there, staying on the energy line. The triangle is right here. It's really small. So really the triangle effects on the long flights are negligible. These guys that are getting the super long OLC flights are really not, for the most part, going for triangle distances. You can look at his barogram trace down below, and you can also see here, it's pushing up at 7,300 meters. That's 24,000 feet. So he's taken advantage of the high density altitude to increase his speed and hand in hand with distance on this one. So density altitude really will pay off. And if you look back, it's just back and forth along that leg, 6 legs. And that's how he scored this thing. And you can look at each of the different legs and different varieties. And in the comment section, you can read about what its flight entailed down in here. So that's kind of how the information out of these flights can be obtained. We look at this again, the airfields. If we want to look at what airfields say this year were the best so far, El Tiro down in Tucson, Seminole, Soaring Society of Houston, they fly their weekend contests all the time. Williams, Warner, and Boulders in the top 6 so far. And we'll probably move on up as the season progresses. And it gives you the number of flights, number of pilots. So you can get a lot of statistics out of that. Clubs, you can see how the clubs are faring as the season progresses. Tucson's holding first place now. Houston and then Boulders holding into 3rd place. All this really is, and this is not a small number of flights. This is the total number of flights that have been flown for the whole time out of Boulder, maybe not out of Boulder, for the club of Boulder since October. And it consisted of 67 flights, 20 pilots. And if you want to see how everybody within the club is doing, you can just click on that and you can see the standings of who all has flown and then the daily scored flights. And you can see John Seaborn today got a really nice flight out of Seminole of about 432 points, 420 kilometers. So yeah, you can kind of look and see how the season progresses this way. Okay, we get down to the daily score. We can go to the speed scoring, and you can look at those the same parameters here. We got the OLC Speed Champion. That's the fastest 6 flights, and again, you got the best flights and the speed record, airfield club, and then down this area are the Gold League scoring. Now, there's not going to be any scoring this year because it hasn't started. It starts in April. But if we look back at 2020, we can pull up the Gold League total, for instance. This is what I write about on those weekly reports every year. And you can see Minden came in 1st place with 144 points, and we were shortly behind him with 127. So we did pretty respectably last year. And then these are the 18 teams on the Gold League. These 4 teams down at the bottom are going to drop off. Air Sailing, Willamette Valley, Carolina Soaring, and Northern California Soaring are going to drop away into the Silver League. But if you look at the Silver League from last year, the total, these 4 teams are going to move up. So Colorado Soaring is going to move into the Gold League. Fault Line Flyers, Greater Boston, and Harris Hill are going to move up. And each year that gets redone. So I think that, well, okay, that's the scoring. BHC, I didn't really talk about that. That's a way, if you want to really do declared flights, you can declare a triangle and then fly it. And if you make your declaration, it's going to take the longest triangle within the different classes. So at the end of the season, you're going to get the longest flight for open class, 18, 15, standard club, 20 meter. I haven't really done this much, but you can. Again, you'll have to use an approved logger that will allow you to do an electronic flight claim on that. So to sign up, you want to go to the competitor tab and contest registration. So all these with asterisks you have to fill out. Note that the birthday is day, it's European day dot month dot year. And then when you come down, you can put your login however you want, set security questions, and then your club on the drop down list. You can go down and find Soaring Society of Boulder down here and drop your club in there somewhere in here. So pilot factor, that'll automatically determine, that's based on your longest OLC scores. If you want to put it in, you can, you don't have to. It's going to be your maximum score distance you've ever had. And the ones without the and this other is extraneous. You don't have to use it. If you wanted to have a trusted competitor to be able to put flights in for you, you can put their information in there as well. The rules which I pulled up on those slides are right here. So you can see all the different rules of all the different contests. The ones that are really pertinent to us are going to be the World League. That's the 19 weekend league, the OLC plus, Speed OLC. If you want the BHC, that's basically Bear and Hilton competition is what that one is. And then the OLC league. It does give you also scoring for under 25. If you have a number of members under 25, they can compete on a separate league as well. The rest of this, except for the Gold League and Silver League, are pretty much all different things for European contests, so you don't need to worry about those rules at all. And I think that's pretty much it. So I'm going to get out of this and open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, so let's have open questions. And I think there was somebody who sent a chat or put their hand up. So please go ahead.
I didn't see that. I was moving things. So
yeah, right. I saw it. Let me see if I can see who that was who sent a chat.
I just
Liebert,
saw it as it was fleeting.
Yeah, Liebert and Amy put their hand up and had a question. Are you still on, Liebert?
Yeah, it's Lee. Well,
Lee.
Amy owns the unit. So, two comments in there, maybe a question since I don't know everything, but the polars are, to my knowledge, based on indicated airspeed and sink rates, which then computes to, in your head, if you're at 18,000 feet, you still follow the speed ring, roughly. I mean, just as a general rule. If it shows that you should be going 90 knots because you're down in sync, then that's about probably where you ought to be. Now, with that said, you're also going a lot further across the ground than you would be at sea level.
So remember though, your vario is not indicated sync. It's true. So you've
That's
got
exactly right. Correct.
Yeah. So you got to correct that, or you're going to be off.
Why would you have to correct it? Because the polar is true airspeed across the top axis, and then the sink or climb rate, if you're going to compute it that way.
And that is true. That or indicated. It's indicated is what you're reading.
But basically, the polar basically doesn't change with altitude. The speed across the ground does.
The polar doesn't change if you've got consistent units on your vertical and horizontal axis, but you do not have that. That is the problem. I totally agree that it doesn't change if you've got consistent units, but if you don't have equivalent units, you're mixing them and it's not going to work. You're going to be way too fast. You've got to correct your vario or your true air or your indicated airspeed to true to bring those into consistent units, or your polar is invalid.
Well, then if that were the case, not to argue here, but if that were the case, then the published polars from all the different manufacturers have to be set at a certain altitude, and they're not. So they're based
that's absolutely true. If that is correct, if you don't correct for the variometer, in the lower regions, you're not looking at much differences, and I don't think the Germans are looking at 18,000 feet. But if you look at go ahead and dial that polar up. If you can pull up a polar on your glider and fly it at altitude and test it for yourself. But after talking to the manufacturers, I don't believe that they are correcting for this.
It's minor. I mean, I
it's
agree.
40%. It'll be 40% off. It's going to be a huge difference.
Your horizontal speed is definitely going to increase. However,
Right.
your sink rate at a given indicated airspeed still going to be the same?
No, because
Okay. All right.
spend some time working on this, and I think you'll find that if you don't equilibrate those units, you're going to be off on your polar.
I just know it from flying. And so I don't throw my speed ring away. I do have one on my analog variometer, and I don't throw that away when I'm flying at 18,000 feet.
Yeah, you're going to be way too fast though using it, because it's going to be spitting out a number for true airspeed, and it's indicated airspeed. That's 40% off at altitude.
Sure. If I look at 400 feet down at 100 knots, okay, that is true. And then if I go back to the to my flight, then I'll see how fast was I really going at that altitude. And you're totally right. I was going 140 true, and the sink was four down.
Anyway, spend some time working on this, and I think you'll come to the conclusion that I have. I know that they used to teach classes. The gentleman out in Ely, Carl Harold, he used to teach classes like this, and always he was stressing slowing down at altitude. They wouldn't say why exactly, but this is actually the reason why that you want to do that.
Well, I do. I mean, I do slow down at altitude, especially.
Well, then you're doing exactly what I'm talking about.
No, for a different reason.
Well,
because the sink is less, but the horizontal speed is greater.
yep. And you're staying up and taking advantage of that higher density altitude for longer.
The only other comment that I had to Armin there that I just wanted to express is that flying with full water is rarely an advantage unless you can do a lot of streeting, because you pay a penalty with your climb. We get away with it at our altitude, but for the most part, and I've played with that just as an example, at the Nationals 2 years ago, Alpha 8 and I hooked up coming out of the first turn point. And we flew together for about another 120 miles, I suppose. I had half water, he had full water. And he would get away from me, but as soon as we get into a thermal, I would climb up to him, and then he'd leave. And then we did that dance for about 120 miles. And so there was basically no difference between our gliders, except now when we got into final glide. We got the final glide, and he beat my pants.
Again, it depends on the strength of the day. Medium strength day, that's probably true. But you've got to have a fully ballasted, a lot of these ships, unless you got a really fast climb, you're going to be hurting yourself. I totally agree with that.
That's true. There are very few gliders that can climb in an average 4 to 5 knot thermal when they're full water.
And I doubt if 4 or 5 knots is enough to justify going full water, more like 8 or 9 knots.
If you average that. True.
Yep.
Agreed. I'm done.
Okay, does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, I have a question for Bob. Hey,
Yeah,
Bob,
Charlie.
can you talk about strategies for maximizing triangles?
Well, again, it has to be the FAI triangle. If you look at the advantage you're getting for the 30% bonus, unless you're being able to fly energy lines in your triangles as you get off course line, you're probably going to be hurting your overall scoring with the OLC scoring. I try to pick up a line, like if I'm going down south, I'll try to pick up a high ground or north that transverses perpendicular to the energy line that I'm currently on, to try to get into a different triangle path, if that makes sense. Is that kind of what you mean, or what do you? I mean, shoot for an equilateral triangle, and you can flatten it down to the 25% leg if it's greater than 500 kilometers on the minimum leg length.
What I noticed that, like say Tucson, for example, they seem to fly a lot of energy lines, and instead of creating an actual triangle, they fly a perpendicular about the mid-span of an energy line, and they get the same exact triangle effect as if they had flown an actual triangular route.
You will, absolutely. And that's true, because it's the biggest triangle that you can fit within your course. So it doesn't matter if you're flying the legs of the triangle, just that apex of each of the points needs to be the maximized distance. The problem with doing what you were just describing is you might run out of your 6 legs and sacrifice some of that distance if you do too many of those. But no, that's absolutely a valid way to do it. And I've done that a lot of times too, where I'll go out on a transect, going away from the primary energy line, moving out and then moving back along that same line I flew. And it's more like an L rather than a triangle, but it'll still cut across for the triangle distance. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Anything else?
I've
I
got a
have a
question,
question.
Bob.
Jack, go ahead.
How will you know if your computer compensates for density, altitude, and true airspeed?
Well, if you can find neutral air, that would be one way you can do it, and see what it's going to spit out, and take a polar and then see if it's correctly predicting the speed to fly, would be one way.
Okay, because like my UDI, I mean, there wouldn't be any settings on there that I could check, was there?
No, not really. I mean, you can tweak your polars usually if you don't want to. I've modified my polars from the factory polars, so for Colorado, I've changed them up a little bit, flatten them. It flattens that curve out a little bit too. So, but no, you can't necessarily get in there. It doesn't allow you to get in there and work with them.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
I have a question.
Go
Sure.
ahead, Danny.
Yeah, this is Danny. I have a question. If I'm following this conversation, what we're saying here is that the problem isn't that the polars in your manual are different. They're all, everything's indicated just like your airspeed indicator in the airplane. The problem is that the devices that are computing what you should be doing are on a different scale, i.e. true airspeed. And the second part of this is that another question. I thought the reason why you wanted to slow down at really high altitudes is that your V speeds, let's call it V never exceed type speeds, change because they are reflecting true. And so essentially, like in a jet, you do have different speeds as you get up higher for a lot of these restrictive type of numbers. And I'm wondering if that's kind of what we're doing here, avoiding like flutter or something like that.
We're almost never operating that fast in our cruise speeds I mean, unless you're in wave, that absolutely can happen in wave where you got to worry about flutter limitations. But on a typical convergence or thermal cross country, you're really not going to be hitting those flutter limitation values. But so that's more of a safety issue. But the problem is if you tend to fly too fast, you're going to be falling your sink rate's going to be going up, and you're going to be out of that high altitude energy band a lot quicker than if you slow down. That's my feeling. If you slow down, you can stay up there high, take advantage of the higher density altitude and faster cruise speed that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just trying to understand the presentation and the other deal, because you're talking about performance. So, where should you be flying? But I was just trying to understand, well, what is indicated, what's true. And it looks to me like the manufacturer's polars are indicated, but the problem is the varios and things are not, they're not indicated is what I gather. And, but I didn't.
They approximate true rate of climb to true rate of sink, and your airspeed, of course, is indicated airspeed. You just need to have equivalent units to make the polars work. If you're mixing units, they aren't going to be working. So true and true are indicated, or are indicated and indicated. You'll be able to compare polars. But if you're mixing them, then you're going to get errors as you get into your higher density altitudes.
That's what I kind of thought you were saying there and all that. So, okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Bob. It's Jeff Clayton.
Yes, Jeff.
So this is a lot less technical of a question, but I know one of the things that our club is trying to achieve always is the highest club OLC. And for us new pilots, or as Armin calls it, aspiring, I could see where we might have a higher average or a higher total if some of us new to soaring and certainly new to cross country were to team up, and that whether it's with each other or, so that those that know the way can maybe get higher scores for those of us that don't, as opposed to always having it as an individual endeavor. I mean, I don't know if there's been any thought to that kind of a thing, but if you were really try to maximize the performance of a club or of a team, you want to, get the highest average, if you will. Does that
Sure,
make any sense?
we have been talking about that and trying to get a mentor program going a little bit, but yeah, absolutely, that's a good way to get into it. Also, though, your flights, the last few flights, you could put those on OLC. So download those flights, even though they were semi-local, those will give you OLC points, and you can start scoring those, even the shorter ones like that. So don't feel that you have to do a 500K flight to post on OLC. It's a 50-kilometer flight, 20-kilometer flight. You can post it.
Right. Good point.
So
Every point,
yeah, download those flights and put them on, every one of them. You'll see your progress by doing that too.
Yeah, I would also say, Jeff, the first year that I flew in OLC, there were quite a few weekends where there weren't 3 pilots flying. So if there's only 2 other club pilots flying, you're the 3rd club pilot that's flying, your flight will absolutely contribute to the club flight, even if it isn't the fastest. So just make it a habit of uploading everything that you do to OLC, and it'll contribute.
Okay. Well, I guess I better sign up.
yeah, I mean, everybody needs to be contributing their flights to OLC. Whether you're an accomplished pilot or an aspiring pilot, let's get all those numbers on OLC. That's how we're going to get back to the top of the. Are there any other questions? I have one if nobody else has a question.
Armin,
I have a
Moriarty
question.
has a GPS in all of their gliders. So what you're saying there is that even the small flights, 50K, and it depends on the handicap of the glider. So big wing glider may have to fly 100 to get points, but a trainer may only need to fly 20. So log every one of the flights.
Yeah,
I have a question or a point to make. And that is, contrary to what Lee has said about wing loading, I think wing loading makes a significant difference. And I think that if you can load up to higher wing loading on good days, it'll make a significant difference in your cross-country speed. And Lee, let's go flying sometime and we'll check it out. But what I'm saying also in terms of Bob's points about the polar at altitude being related to true airspeed compared to indicated airspeed, go ahead and fly your correct McCready speed, being conservative, however, but take advantage of the additional true airspeed benefits that you get. But go ahead and fly your higher speeds, and you're going to take advantage of your true airspeeds. But I think flying at higher wing loadings and go ahead and fly at speed at altitude, and you're going to really take advantage of speed, cross-country speed. So that would be the position I would take on that.
Bob, I have a question on the maximum altitude loss issue and this is for OLC plus, not the speed contest. But if one releases, if we release at, say 9,000 feet, and doesn't that start our triangle so that when we come back and close, if we come back and close even at 8,000 feet and go past where we released, doesn't that count as where we started?
Absolutely it does. And that's why it's important to note that. I'm just saying that you don't have to close it at that point. It's possible to close it farther down, but yeah, that'll maximize every potential triangle if you do close it at that point.
Yeah,
But
that's what I,
a lot of
that's
times
what,
I'll come back on a long flight and I know I did a triangle, say down in South Park, and it's kind of a two lines along the energy, following the energy line coming back. I'll just close it, once I leave South Park to make that triangle there and not have to worry about my initial part. So you don't have to close it at that point, but that will maximize every possibility if you do cross your release point within the 1,000-meter vertically.
good. Yeah, okay. That's what I've been trying to do. Good. At least I'm doing something right. Yeah. Good. Good. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, if there's no other questions, we'll conclude here. And next week, we're going to hear from Gary Stubbe, and he's going to talk about both ends of the rope. Gary is both a tow pilot and a glider pilot. He's been at both ends of the rope, and he's even rebuilt our tow plane. So he knows a lot about towing, and he knows a lot about being towed as a glider pilot. So his talk will be on mainly on tow and what our tow pilots, a lot of glider pilots, myself especially, who don't fly tow, don't really get to see that end of the rope and know what's going on. So he's going to give some insights in that, and I think we'll all want to be in attendance. Also, for you pilots who are aspiring pilots, expect to see an email from me, and I'm really looking forward to wide participation in the capstone session. That capstone session is really going to be all about our aspiring pilots for a change. So thanks, everybody. And
Armin, one more thing. Armin, one more thing.
definitely,
Nothing to do with the seminar here. It's great. Thank you. The Wings Over Rockies is going to have a glider presentation, and Charlie and I, and I forget who the other one is. Is it John Barry, I think. Is that right? Yeah. We're all going to assemble our gliders at the Wings Over Rockies, and they've got some video presentations. They may be also kind of looping, what is it, running on empty. So just got to throw that out for anybody who wants to come out and see some great gliders. The LS4 that Barry has, probably the best standard class glider I ever had. So.
Yeah, that'll be at the Blue Sky Gallery area at Centennial. If you need to find out, whenever you come in there, if you put in your Google Colorado Skies Academy, SKIES, because sometimes if you put in Blue Sky Gallery, it'll put you on the other side of the field. You just put in Colorado Skies Academy, it'll give you directions right to it, because that's the school that's right next to the Blue Sky Gallery where we are going to have the event.
and what day is that event?
27th of March.
Okay, if you guys would send me
10 to 4, I think, 10 to 3.
if y'all would send me an email about that, I will include it in the next announcement, or maybe the one the week before that. I'll put that in the email blast that I send out to everyone for this ground school. We'll include the Wings Over Rockies event.
It
And
does
also we have
overlap with it does overlap with the WorkFest Saturday. So if those that want to attend, please do get your WorkFest assignment done before or on Sunday. But we'd love to see you all there.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a good evening. We'll see you next week with Gary Stubbe talking about both ends of the rope.
Thank you.
Good night.